So I'm trying to make this a shorter video, so I'm just going to cut to the chase and start by asking you the main question of this video. And I really want us to think about this and ponder it for a moment. What exactly about the Pirate King is free? Because I know we hear from Luffy, who, with all due respect, and I love him as a main character and all these things, but is maybe the dumbest character in the One Piece world. And I'm not saying he doesn't see the truth and know all that stuff, but his definitions and all these things are always kind of screwy. His idea of, in the official Viz version, he says the one who is the most free is the Pirate King, and it's in reference to conquering such powerful oceans. And then, obviously, in the Scanlations is the line what most of us know, which is the freest man on the seas is the Pirate King. Well, like I said, what exactly about the Pirate King is free? Because if your aim is to not control the ocean and you just want to be free in it, I would argue that really all you'd have to do to accomplish that is be able to swim. So with that in mind, let's go back to that scene in Shakky's rip-off bar in Sabaody and really take a deep look at what's going on there and the raw deal that is ripping off the Straw Hat crew in that moment. And we're just going to touch on briefly Luffy's freest man on the seas speech, because I totally think that ultimately is just a clue for Luffy wanting to swim. All the way back on page 1 or page 5, whatever page of chapters 1 starts on, Luffy is trying to learn to swim to gain Shanks' approval. I think that one of the big tricks of chapter 1 is that Luffy's definition of that changes from the beginning of the chapter to the end of the chapter, which is a huge trick, I think, with Shanks and stuff. But just looking at the Luffy line and stuff, if we use our eyes for a second, the entire time that he is talking, he is inside of a fridge. You know, like where you would store something for future use or to keep it frozen and under wraps, all that stuff. Luffy, everything that he says in this chapter, his placement in the panels and all that stuff is inside of an open door to a fridge. So, and the arc just before this, not even 20, 30 chapters before this moment, is where we met Oars. And what was Oars? Oars was a giant vessel waiting for Luffy's shadow to be put into him. And he was waiting in a big fridge. He was frozen, all that stuff. And he was even the ice giant, which I think is a whole other thing I'm not going to touch on in this video. But basically, I just think that the idea of being put on ice, being put on hold, prolonged, that is what happens here. I think this is the second half, where the second half of the story was added ultimately for One Piece, and where we get into, you know, Marineford and all that stuff on one level. But on another level, it's just another part of the big plan. And I want to get into the big plan in this video, because there's a lot of things in this chapter that I don't think anyone's ever talked about, or at least put together in maybe this way, and I think it's really, really interesting. I'd really like to hear you guys' comments about it, and what you guys think and everything. And please like and subscribe, and please share the video if you like it. This whole entire scene is just one more part of the plan, I think, and we're gonna get into that plan a little bit today. And before I lose you and you jump overboard because I've gone too mad, the SBS for the chapter where Luffy says that the Pirate King is the most free on the oceans, the very first question deals with Moria and someone who woke up in their shadow was stolen somehow, and where's it going? And there's even a clue as to the body that it was put into is a zombie getting lectured by Luffy. So very, very interesting things here that we're going to touch directly on later on in the video. Now, I could go on forever about how nothing about Roger and freedom seems to coexist. I mean, there's not much more to look at aside from the first page. From every page we see him for 500, 800 chapters, 900 chapters, he has been shackles. And the one time we see him non-shackles, or at least being led to death or in prison or in something along those lines, we don't even see his eyes, and he's wearing Luffy's straw hat, and there's all these things. So I think it's a big just thing to make us think of Roger and Luffy together. But when it comes down to Roger, real quick, just what exactly was free about him? On the first page of the manga, he gets put to death. It seems like he did not get to name the One Piece treasure. The government did that. In fact, when he became the Pirate King, which was a title that he did not choose, it was given to him by the paper and by the government, his big plan of starting the Great Age of Piracy, in the anime at least, is implied to only happen because someone asks him the question of about his treasure. But even then, he doesn't mention the poneglyphs, he doesn't mention world history, and he also doesn't call it this supposed laugh-tail name that he gave it. He calls it what the government calls. So just all these things, freedom, being able to name things, all these ideas, none of those to me fit with Roger. And then if that wasn't enough, all this stuff like he had terminal illness, he was racing against the clock, and then once he was actually the Pirate King, if we really want to get technical about it, he quit being a pirate. He stopped being a pirate once he was the Pirate King and disbanded his crew, and then spent, it seems like, the majority of his remaining time either trying to make sure that he had an heir or being in prison. So all of those things just don't really super spell out freedom to me, you know, on just a very surface level. And it kind of seems especially pertinent now with, you know, the ideas and subjects of freedom of choice. To me, the idea that the Pirate King's associated to freedom, an aspect of that for me would have to be this idea of at least the freedom to choose the name of things, to choose the name of what you find. All these things, I think, would be fall in the category of freedom. And Roger doesn't have anything like that.
Folks, I hate to spoil your fun, but there's no such thing as rights, okay? They're imaginary. We made them up, like the boogeyman. Rights are an idea. They're just imaginary. They're a cute idea. Cute. But that's all. Cute and fictional. But if you think you do have rights, let me ask you this. Where do they come from? People say, well, they come from God. They're God-given rights. Oh, fuck, here we go again.
And when it comes to the idea of being free on the seas and being free to journey and go wherever you wanted, Roger, you know, he did not get to choose any of that stuff. I mean, it seemed like he was on a race against the clock to, you know, before his death from his disease. But also, like, when he got to the One Piece treasure, he couldn't even decide to use it. They were too early. So it's like nothing about him seems free. If anything, his almost theme seems to be partly tied to being tied to time in some way. So let's just move on from this idea that the Pirate King and freedom are the same thing, because we're going to tie back to it. But let's move on to the rest of those couple pages around that freest man on the seas who can't swim section. Now, we make such a big deal about how Shanks says, you know, Mr. Rayleigh, I was so surprised. I met some kid saying the exact same thing as Roger. And we automatically assume that he's talking about Luffy. I think that's part of the trick, because when we really, really break it down, aside from that moment where things happen and we don't see almost like the curtains getting pulled over our eyes or it's a mirage, we do know some things that Roger has said, and some of the crew has actually stated those same things. It seemed like the main goal of Odin and all that stuff and reaching the last island was to circumnavigate the world. Well, we know that Nami wants to do that, so she was in the East Blue and she said that. That's one. But there is another kid that was in the East Blue that has said something at least very similar to what Shanks has heard in some form before. But first, just to touch on a little bit more of that chapter before getting into the tinfoil part of this video. This chapter where he says the freest thing is also the chapter, you know, it was hinted at in Skypiea, but here it's explained in some fashion how Roger could possibly be tied to the poneglyphs. Now, even this one, we find out later on that yes, he was hearing the voices, but what we knew about already was actually caused by someone else other than Roger. Roger dictated the rules. Kind of like how, you know, Roger had a kid to make sure that he would be the Pirate King. You know, and then a sign of freedom, you know, choosing what your kids are going to do. But in this scene, all of this stuff, I think, is about another kid from East Blue, like I was mentioning earlier. And we don't have to get so crazy with it, because we know that Oda works with this idea of two sides of the same coin, and I think that that is a very, very, very limited view of this, because he's got coins, but every coin's got 5 sides, and every side actually has 6 edges. So it's like an entirety, it's all a big web, and the mixings and all this stuff are really crazy. But when it comes down to it, I think that one of the principles that Oda plays around with a lot is the idea of being two-faced. This chapter really breaks that stuff down. So for one, I think that chapter 506, the cover, Roger and Rayleigh, is really loaded, and the whole idea of maybe a secret organization working with a doctor to make sure someone doesn't actually get to live long enough to do something, I think is a very, very real possibility. Let's just keep it really, really simple and look at some kind of stupid information stuff that we are shown throughout the chapter, and we don't even pick up on it. Rayleigh actually appears in 25 panels. Okay, he's drawn, in 25 panels. And he's actually talking with a voiceover and everything in 36 panels. So this idea of a hidden voice kind of controlling things and influencing things, I think, is a little bit hinted there. But it gets even crazier because when we look at the panels that he's in and the times that he actually talks, it is either from talking from behind his back, we don't see his eyes, his head's cut off to where we don't see what his eyes look like, and just this idea of, not being able to see someone's eyes and trusting them and see into their soul and all these things, I think is being hinted on here because in the 36 panels that he talks in, he appears in 25. His eyes are only shown 8 times. And 17 times it is specifically either shown where it is talking from behind his back so we don't see his eyes, or his eyes are specifically closed, or the angle is too far away for us to make out what his eyes look like to see if we can, see if he's trustworthy, look into his soul a little bit. That is just a crazy, simple, obvious clue. With that in mind, one of the things we know that Shanks could have possibly come here and said to Rayleigh about a kid from the East Blue is that he could have maybe meeting Usopp. And I say that because I'm not going to go into craziness with Shanks today, but just on a surface level, base level, whatever, we know that the first person he met in that Chapter 0 thing was Yasopp. And so far, he seems to be like the only crew. That first person that the captain meets doesn't become the first mate. And that seems like a big clue to me. But going back to what I was saying about with Oda and the coins and stuff, and the faces, I think the idea of Shanks here saying that there's a kid saying the exact same thing as Captain Roger and saying the very same words the captain said is supposed to be, from Oda, a subtle clue to us that there is at least two separate things going on during this moment, during this scene. That there is something hidden going on. With everything else we've talked about and all the hidden hands of movement and everything, I think that there's a big chance that what our perception of what Shanks and Rayleigh are talking about in this scene is maybe not what Rayleigh and someone else in the past might have discussed and is maybe what Rayleigh's thinking about right now.
At what point does all of this stuff just break down and become just a lot of stupid shit that somebody made up?
Keep it in mind, the idea of keeping it simple. The panel after Luffy has his freest man in the sea speech, we see this pretty ominous looking panel of Rayleigh. And I say that because with this idea in mind that he's the secret mastermind dude, plotting things, he knows everything's going to according to plan. This is the Gendo Ikari, okay, things are going well here. It's keeping it simple. And the idea that a manga page is printed on two sides and when you look at the light you can see through it. When we look through this panel, it is extremely crazy looking. Do you see Usopp there? Looks like he's an octopus man, has 4 arms, and he's stuck exactly inside the bubble where Rayleigh just happens to say, "I see." Because yeah, that's the page behind. Like I said, that's the page with the freest man on the sea speech. And then when we look through it, when we go backwards, just like Roger to do when he got to Lodestar, he had to go back and re-examine his journey. We have to do the same thing, and that's basically what I want this channel to really be about, and what I wanted just this video to talk about. Because I cannot summarize what's going on here, any more quickly than I have, and we're already at almost 15 minutes. I just kind of wanted to make this video to just point out some glaring, I guess, just possibilities of what could be happening here, and the crazy. We think Nika was a plot twist. Nika, we can play around a lot with Nika, and I don't know why, but for some reason when I first saw, I thought like Nika, and just made me think of like a fruit. And then with all this stuff with the fruit, but when you just play with it backwards, it's Anakin. And this idea of Anakin Skywalker being the opposite of this water walker, which would be someone who could swim to me. Wings are fins. I mean, if you look at the definition of wings, a lot of them just fall under the definitions of fins for fish. And so just to kind of end this video on, a mystery to get you tuned into the next one, after that page with all the dream stuff, we see Luffy stuff in his mouth, and you'll have to check out my Bing Saki video tomorrow for all the stuff with the eating and all these things. But Rayleigh's getting ready to pour his glass, and that panel where he says it was 10 years ago, it was about 10 years ago, that he happened to meet up with Shanks on Sabaody by chance, on this island by chance.
You know, like a liar.
The fact that he says we met on this island by chance, so we don't think it was like on purpose, I think is just glaringly obvious here. And when you look at through the panel, you actually, it's this whole like pirate dude noticing 𝚗𝚙𝚢 coming in and all this stuff. But when you really just look at it, it looks like it's Buggy there. So I think there's a big aspect of people working together behind the scenes and pulling strings, and the idea of like Marco Polo hitting a ball into a hole, like, and in the sense of like getting certain vessels that are holding something, spirits, power, soul, buggy balls, whatever, to a certain location is, I think, some aspect of what's going on here. And that's just kind of what I wanted to start. And I think a huge part of that is this idea that they trick the Pirate King, and that they pretty much, someone is in charge of tricking the Pirate King into being the Pirate King, which is another one of, I think, Oda's principles, is that he always convinces you to only look at one side of the page. And this chapter has a great example of it at the end, that Moria SBS I pointed out earlier, with all the things that we talked about, and this idea of maybe leading a target on a certain path and maybe checking some boxes and all these things with a plan. Look at this cover page, and you see Usopp marking on a list, and
the implication.
I feel like you're not getting this at all.
I'm not getting it.
Marking the score, and there's all sorts of things with bowl and G and games, and maybe getting, led down a bowling lane and a track, and just crazy surprise, bombastic endings, I think, that might be, on the horizon. That essentially, I'm not saying these characters know what they're doing or are doing these things on purpose, but something, an inner drive of some sorts. Maybe the author's will is drawing them, wants to keep telling the story. So things happen to prolong the story, and ultimately, I think that's what the Pirate King has been so far, is someone who has been able to have been stopped from flipping the world upside down. But the meaning of that is, I guarantee you, stupider than you've ever even thought of. So with that, my name is 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚒𝚑𝚝. Thank you so much for watching. Please keep tuning the channel. Check out my being Saki video. Check out my poneglyphs are a trap video. With that, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.